everyone, today we are trying to solve this question, solving questions with Brainpower. In this question we are given a zero indexed 2D integer array of questions where question I defines the points that we would gain out of solving this question and the brain power which we would consume on solving this question. Now the downside of solving any question here means that the next set of brain power I number of questions we would have to skip. So in a way, whenever we solve any question at a given index, we do gain some points here, but we would have to miss the points that we could have gained by not solving, by skipping over the next set of brain power I questions. So in this question, basically the requirement is to get the maximum number of points given that we are given some questions with some like values of the points and the number of the next set of questions that we have to skip if we try to solve this question. And so it's like an optimization problem. We want to maximize the points that we can gain. We do not care about the number of questions that we can solve, but we only want to maximize the points, be it whatever set of questions we select out of it. Now coming to the examples one by one to gain more clarity, let's consider this example. Here it's given that if we solve the question 0 refers to this question, we would earn 3 points, but the downside would be we would have to skip the next set of 2 questions, this one and this one. So we would be only left with this last question which we could solve. This would ultimately give us 2 more points. So our total points would be 3 plus 2, which is 5. And now if I just ignore this question, I can solve this question. If I solve this question 4, I would get 4 points here, but the downside would be I would have to skip the next 3 questions. Now there are only 2 questions after this question, so in a way we are only left with 4 points. Now similarly, if I just start with this question, I would have 4 points again, but I again would need to skip the next 4 questions. There is only 1 question here, so we will have still the 4 points only. So till now we had the maximum point, which was 3 plus 2, which gave us 5 points. The other way, starting from this question or starting from this question, both gave us 4 points only. So until now the answer is 5 only. Now consider solving from this question onwards. If I solve this question, I would gain only 2 points, but there is no question after this question, so in a way we are minimizing our answer if we start from the end. But it is very clear that if I start from the last question, the answer, assume that we have only this last question or only one entry in the entire array, then that means we are always aware of how much points that we can gain. There is no ambiguity. Since this is the only question it would be there in the array, the points that I could gain out of after solving this question is the maximum point that I can gain on attempting this exam. So in a way our base condition would be the points that we can gain out of solving the last question. And since we don't know the answer for the last question, we can probably think backwards and try to get the answer maximum point that we can gain for a previous index using the value that we have already derived at an index higher than the previous index. Okay, so let's declare a DP array where DPI would be the maximum point that I can gain, till index I starting from the end. Okay, so for example, if I consider the last index of the array, the maximum point that I can gain till this last index of the array starting from end, which is basically this index itself, it would be 2. Now consider this position, dp of basically 0, 1, 2, 3. So dp of 2 would be the maximum point that I can gain at this index starting from the end. So if I like include this, like if I try to solve this question, the maximum point would be 4 and 4 and yeah, and the maximum 4 plus the question that I could have solved like this much after skipping this much number of questions in front. So that would be basically dp of, if this index is I, then the next position which we could have used, or the next position of the question which we could have solved, would be I plus questions of this I1 plus 1. Okay, so basically I'm referring to this position, I plus questions I1 plus 1. This is the position of the array which we would still be able to solve. The question at this position which we would still be able to solve if we attempt the question at ith index. So if we attempt the question I, we would gain the points that we would gain out of solving this question, plus the maximum point that we could have gained till this index. Okay, we are not considering any index between I and questions I1 plus 1 plus I, because we cannot attempt any question in between these two index. Okay. And since we want the maximum possible value of the points that we can gain till index I starting from the end, we could either attempt the question, in which case we would have this point, or we could ignore the current question, in which case we would still consider the maximum point gained till index I plus 1. Okay, so this is what we have implemented here also. Let's go through the implementation once. dp n minus 1 is what is the base condition for us. At the last index we are always aware of the answer. It would be the points that we would gain out of solving this last question. In this case it would be 2. Now starting from index n minus 2, since we have already declared the base condition of n minus 1 index, until the point we reach the index 0, we decrement the index I 1 by 1 and calculate the dp of I at each position from backwards till front. So dp of, yeah, so here we are just formulating this approach. I will basically like initialize the dpi with the points that I can gain out of solving this question, and I can, like, if I like solve this question, I would gain the points at this question plus the maximum point that I can gain at the index I plus questions I1 plus 1. If this value, this index goes out of bound of the array, then we cannot gain any point further, so we will say we are gaining 0 point. So this condition only takes care of that. And finally we are doing this part, maximizing dpi plus 1, comparing it with the value if we solve the current question. So this is what we are doing here. And finally the result which we would obtain at dp of 0 would be our answer. This basically means the maximum point that we can get till index 0 starting from end. Okay, so just to be very clear here, it does not mean that we are always solving the question at index I. It just means that we have the options of solving a question at given index, or we cannot solve. So if we consider solving that question, we would like add the points that we would gain out of solving that question plus the maximum point that we could have gained, that we would have gained till index I plus questions I1 plus 1, because we have to skip the questions in between this index I and I plus questions I1 plus 1. And since we are like maximum point is what we are storing, we are like if we ignore this current question, we have to use the dpi plus 1 value. So overall we store the maximum of these two and keep on populating dp index, dp at I position, and move backwards until we reach dp